Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you're doing well. So I have finished Margret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. This is what it looks like. The reason why I read it was because I would see a lot of American feminists, liberals, progressives, those in the left wing, consistently mention on pro-life pages and such when someone was against abortion, oh, this is just like The Handmaid's Tale. If you were pro-fertility, they would say, you know, this is just like The Handmaid's Tale. And as I always do, when I hear a consistent text being circulated, I'm like, okay, let's check this out, let's see what it's all about. Because what happens in the Western liberal universities obviously is going to spread out amongst the world. And it has on here that is a worldwide bestseller. Now, there's a lot I want to say about the text, okay? I was thinking of reading it twice and then coming up with even more notes because I think I could do like 80 series breaking down all this stuff that's happened in this. And I mean, subhanallah, it's such a complex text in terms of how many different angles you can break it down about the psychology behind it, the author's intentions, why I think that it sold so many. But the gist of it is, there's an apocalyptic society that is totalitarian, and the fertility rates have been going down because there was a nuclear power plant. There's a lot of toxic waste, pesticides, herbicides, also biowarfare that has caused, and there's a civil war as well between, like, on one end it looked like there was the Baptists and they were fighting with the Quakers and different Christian sects fighting against each other. And they have these centers, the red centers, where they train these women in sort of a dystopian Christian-esque mentality where they operate as a sort of surrogate mothers, but the surrogacy isn't like today's surrogacy, whether these women are brood mares and they don't enjoy very many rights and they're confined to not every couple gets a handmaid, and you have to qualify. And the one who's the character in this story, she's in a top official's home, and apparently these handmaids, they get passed around. So they go to one home, they get pregnant, they give birth, they get to breastfeed for a while, then they're sent off to their next assignment to get fertilized by the man of the household, and they just do that until they can, and then they're retired somewhere. Now in the text it talked about this place called the colonies, where they're toxic waste sites, and if you get sent there you die pretty soon of some type of cancer and an ailment because it's so polluted, it's so unhealthy. And others, they go on farms. Then mysteriously there's this private gentleman's club, which is a brothel, and where women are sterilized to get their tubes tied so they can't bear children, and they're used by the men, and the women can use each other, and you know, they're just there for the enjoyment of the flesh. Now I find it interesting that the feminists don't mention that. Like when I'm a religious woman and I'm like, hey, I don't like this meat market angle, they only focus on the shaming of pregnancy. But they don't use this book to shame surrogacy. I find it very odd. They use it to shame Christians and to shame women who want to have large families. So this is why I'm very puzzled, and I'm glad I read the book for myself, because I made a lot of annotations and underlined stuff and wrote on pages, because the good part is of the text, when it goes into different sections, like see here, you got lots of places to write stuff. And the margins are nice so that like you can write down things, and it's smooth reading, I must say, even though I did find myself arguing with it. But there's a character called Moira, Moira, Mora, and she's kind of a butch feminist, and she goes and decides to be sterilized and be sort of used by men, and she escapes the Red Center and all that. But it's very... You think it's going one way, and then it goes the other way. It's sort of hard to describe. But I want to break it down because I felt like when I was reading this, like, I wonder if you could take the brothel scene that she had and make that the dystopian, not the Handmaid. But the weird part is, in this dystopian totalitarian society, there's the group called the Wives, there's the Marthas, there's the Aunts. So the Aunts are like, I think she fashioned them after nuns, after Catholic nuns that used to smack the hands of the children who wouldn't pay attention, right? And of the madrasa women who hit the children. I think that she fashioned the aunts after the caricature of the angry religious woman. But I really found myself liking Aunt Lydia in this text and the aunts. They had cattle prods, so I thought that was a bit on the nose because a cattle prod moves the sheep, it zaps them and such. But she uses this as these aunts, they cattle prod these women, and their uniform is a red dress. So the symbol of the red dress, you can go into a lot of symbology on that. The author says it's for blood. Okay. But these women, these handmaids, are only used for their body. They're not really considered people. And there's all these different rules about where they're supposed to be. But, you know, the contrast of that is the brothel women, they're used only for their flesh. And she kind of makes it dystopian to be pregnant because these women are used to revamp the population. But my whole criticism of this text thus far, though, is that if you were to maximize fertility, you would allow the husbands to have multiple wives, not just a wife and one handmaid. You know. So if it was really about rebuilding the population, the husbands would have been polygamous in a real sense, not like only getting to have one handmaid who gives them one baby and then they're off to the next family. So the angle she was going for doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But these handmaids are... What makes it as kind of a sad story is that many of them unalive themselves. And there's also this wall where people are placed once they've been executed to kind of like show you they're bad, which, I mean, that's been done in Game of Thrones, that was done in real life. You know, put his head on a spike. It's like, that was done in history. It doesn't really have the same punchiness. She should have done something more grotesque, like something actually like pretty scary. That is like in the South and different parts of America during the Civil War, people were hung from trees. So I don't know. It seems to me she's also mocking the Amish because the uniform, like the Mormons, the early Mormons and the Amish, the uniform of that, the bonnet-esque looking thing, you know, reminds me of that. And these handmaidens are only allowed to walk in pairs and have chaperones. Like, there's so many anti-religious notes to this, and she like inserts. She's attacking Christianity, really, but then she's like making it a Jewish type of story. But she's not Jewish. She looks Jewish, but she's not. And I was, you know, I'm looking at her, you know, she's a feminist writer. There's a lot I'm going to break down in this text. I'm just giving you a kind of the appetizer of what I'm going to talk about. But, subhanAllah, it's definitely a text that is being used to go against religions and going against the fertility culture, because there was also on, like, there was a scene where one of the doctors who was performing abortions was placed on the wall. But there's also a scene where the handmaidens, they circle around a guy and they're allowed to, you know, pummel him until death. There is one, she does, what I will give her is that she has some pretty descriptive writings of, like, the inner dialogue of the character comes out really well, and the sentence flow is really nice, so it's not a difficult, boring read, but rather it does keep you enthralled, like, okay, what's gonna happen next, and you don't really know what's gonna happen next. I don't like the ending. It has a Sopranos type of ending, you know, where Tony Soprano, at the end of the series, you don't know if he lives or dies. I really don't like cliffhangers like that, unless you're going to do a part 1, part 2, part 3, but clearly I don't think she's going to do that. We'll get into the Testaments book as well, but the fetishization of adultery and fornication is definitely a key component. And the commander, when you first look at him in the beginning of the text, he is seen as this sort of patriarchal military man. But then at the end, you kind of feel bad for him because you find out he's more liberal-leaning. He gives her, like, magazines and such, but he still exchanges these gifts for acts of intimacy. You know, I can see where the feminists are getting their talking points from. But as a religious woman reading it, I'm like, I see what you're doing. And it's a clever, unique text, as in it's standing out amongst other books on the bookshelf, if you were to look at it. But it's just, oh, I want to get into it so bad, but I don't want to make this video too long, because I'm going to really dig into this text from a literary standpoint, like a literary criticism and a literary analysis. So I really want to go, you know, segment by segment. And another thing that I enjoyed about this book, though, was that you really feel the voice of the characters. Not an easy thing to do as a fictional writer. I really liked Cora. She was like a character, and you can see that children are valued. You know, they are valued. But you also see the meanness of women in here, and how women are not all kind to each other. So this isn't a book about sisterhood. And also there's these groups called the Spies, sort of like the Gestapo police. You see a lot of Nazi-esque stuff going on in this book. And then there was a time where she does, like, Underground Railroad themes, Anne Frank Hiding in the Attic themes, which I don't think you should borrow from those and put in the text. I think it's better you create your own. But nonetheless, I will give it 4 out of 5 stars just because of how the scenes are done, the character development, the different storylines, the fact that it's not like, you don't find yourself getting super bored, and the voice of the characters really stand out to where you can really remember each one. Because some texts, they don't do really well. Like the commander's wife, Serena Joy, whose real name was Pam. You really get to see her and, like, feel for the characters. And I really wish we could have gotten more about the brainwashing and, like, torture-esque type of stuff. You know, the food scenes were interesting as well, like where she's eating and stuff. It's a fascinating thing. The food plays a key role when she's sent to the store. Like, the roles of each group, I wish we would have known more about this group called the Econ Wives, the Marthas, the sorting process. Like, if you recall in Harry Potter, there's sorting, right? Oh, you go into your house and there's a sorting hat. She didn't give us enough on how the women are placed where they're placed, because they do get to choose. And she has a daughter who was taken by the regime, and her husband as well. We don't really get to know their fate, which I think is a terrible cliffhanger, but I guess she's trying to hint at the untold stories of the Jews. But I just think she didn't satisfy us with coming to certain conclusions, like how we wanted, so that was unique. but the character would often think about her daughter, what she's doing, and would give us like memoirs. So the text it goes back and forth between inner dialogue and then memoirs, and then the situational things happening at the time politically. I really wish we could have got more into the toxic waste stuff, how this regime was established. The book should have been thicker. Should have been, like 4 inches thick, or part 1, part 2, like, how the Harry Potter series, Lord of the Rings series, Game of Thrones, it comes out in volumes. This should have been a volume series. It gave us a little bit of taste, but not enough to truly enjoy the dystopian element. I wanted it to be more dystopian, because if the goal is to increase fertility rates, I don't see how only giving a selected few of men the 1 baby each per handmaiden. I don't really get it. I think that a harem would have been more plausible. Like, a man who's known to be fertile, fertilizing everyone. And there was a medical-esque aspect to it as well, about the role of doctors and good doctors versus corrupt doctors, So that was an interesting angle. This should have gone more into the, but hold on. You can also tell that there's a bit of lust in this book. I think that this author has maybe some kinky stuff that she put into this, because as you read it, you're like, am I in someone's, like, weird dream right now? Like, this seems like a little bit of, like, BDSM slave pornish, to be quite honest with you. So I was like, okay, where's the gore at? We're getting a lot of, like, her body's being used, But I'll get more into that later. I'm still thinking about, should I read it twice just to get even more out of it? Or should I, go with what I already have and then read it again and then just keep uploading, like, part this, part that, right? But the characters, you learn to accept who they are as you go on. Kind of like in Harry Potter, there's Snape. In the beginning, you don't like him, right? He's always mean to the trio. But then later, you're like, oh, he actually is this good. You get a little bit of that with the commander and his wife, Serena Joy, right? But if the goal was to maximize fertility, it wasn't maximized via the Handmaids. So the whole plot, to me, has a big giant hole in it. And a lot of people don't like the Handmaids, which I don't get, because if your goal is to increase the population of the earth, you would respect and honor the women, but these women are not honored. They're just seen as vessels. If the human species was so important, you would fully honor the women who birth the children. But again, I would say that if you want to argue, that you should only read the text, I'd argue, if you are coming from a religious perspective and you want to be able to have the ammunition ready when you talk to an atheist, liberal, feminist who brings it up. Because on Instagram, I constantly get spammed with insults saying I'm advocating the Handmaid's Tale. But now I could actually say, because I've read it, I can be like, actually, you're advocating the brothel culture of the Handmaid's Tale, which is far worse. Because those women were sterilized, they're given drugs and alcohol, and when their body is used up, they're sent off to go die in the colonies. At least one is doing an act of giving life to the world, and the other one is not. But it did make me mad that the upper echelons of men were not committed to the new society, because they're still doing brothel culture, but they're subjugating these handmaids, so there's a contradiction there. Why would it's you can't tell if it's a matriarchy or a patriarchy in this text, because the wives have a lot of power that even their husbands don't have, and they can punish these women and make their lives horrible. And the weird part is that when it's called the ceremony, when they get together and try to make a baby, and the wife is there. Like, what are you gonna do? So, just give me an update okay, I'm gonna read on the Testaments, that which is like the sequel to this, so stay tuned.